On July 11, 1958, at 2 a.m., a county sheriff entered the home of Virginia couple Richard and Mildred Loving, forced them out of their bed, and placed them under arrest. Their crime? Interracial marriage. This is the story of Loving versus Virginia and the landmark civil rights decision that would set an important precedent for marriage rights in America. Richard, who was white, and Mildred, who was Black and Native American, spent the early morning hours of July 11th in jail. They were tried and found guilty of violating Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924, a series of laws that made race mixing illegal. The Lovings were then given an ultimatum: spend 1 year in prison or leave the state of Virginia for 25 years. Frightened and unaware of their legal options, they moved to Washington, D.C., where their marriage was legal. They raised their 3 children in the nation's capital, financially strapped and isolated from friends and family. 5 years later, they returned to Virginia to visit Mildred's relatives, but were arrested for a second time for traveling together. Inspired by the burgeoning civil rights movement, Mildred decided to fight back. So in 1963, she wrote a letter to U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy asking for his advice. Kennedy referred the Lovings to the American Civil Liberties Union, who assigned their case to 2 young lawyers named Bernard Cohen and Philip Hirschkopf. Cohen and Hirschkopf took their appeal all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing that Virginia's anti-miscegenation laws violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed African Americans citizenship and all its privileges. The broad and sweeping language of the amendment, they argued, made no mention of interracial marriage, and thus guaranteed equal protection of a human being's right to marry. Attorneys from the state of Virginia argued that the state's rights should be prioritized over federal laws. But the argument didn't hold up. On June 12, 1967, the court unanimously struck down the Virginia marriage ban and overturned the Lovings' conviction. The court ruling reverberated across America, invalidating anti-miscegenation laws not only in Virginia, but in 16 other states that held them as well. After winning their case, the Lovings were finally free to do what they wanted to do all along. They lived quietly in Virginia as husband and wife until Richard's death in 1975. Loving versus Virginia would inspire gay marriage advocates during their own Supreme Court victories decades later. For example, 2003's Lawrence versus Texas decision ruled that a Texas statute criminalizing sexual activity between members of the same sex was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court would directly cite Loving in 2 subsequent landmark cases that paved the way for same-sex marriage. The first was 2013's United States versus Windsor, which struck down a key part of the Defense of Marriage Act. And the second was Obergefell versus Hodges, a 2015 ruling which granted same-sex couples around the nation the right to marry. Few cases are so appropriately named as Loving versus Virginia, a case about one couple's brave fight to validate their love in the eyes of the law. Loving versus Virginia forever redefined marriage in the United States.